Hey everyone, and welcome to Generative Now. I am Michael Mignano. I am a partner at Lightspeed. And for today's episode, I talked to Semil Shah, founder and partner at Haystack VC, a legendary seed fund that has invested in companies like Figma, HashiCorp, DoorDash, Instacart, and now lots of AI companies as well. Semil and I go way back. We're good friends. So this was a bit more of a casual conversation. So take a listen to this episode with Semil Shah. Hey, Semil.
Sir.
We finally made this happen. I'm excited. You and I have been friends now for a while, but I've been following you on Twitter for much longer than that. One of the things I always liked about your tweets were, I found them fascinating, interesting. I learned a lot from them, you know, as I was like starting my company and then becoming a VC. The other reason I liked your tweets were I could also relate to like the non-tech ones. Like I could relate to a lot of your tweets around parenting or food or music. And I saw one recently that gave me a chuckle, which was this one about the kids baking championship.
Oh,
and maybe just to refresh your memory.
Yeah. No, I remember watching this. I was like actually pretty surprised.
So just for the listeners, Semil tweeted, the ending of an episode of Kids Baking Championship is pretty ice cold. These poor kids, I can't believe they go Survivor style. No medals for all in this show. And it's totally true. I just saw it too, like 3 weeks ago, and blew my mind.
Yeah. For some strange reason, all my kids, they get fixated on the Food Network. We were watching a couple weeks ago the Kids Baking Championship, and they treated the end like they would like kill off like an adult chef in a show.
Yes.
And I was like, and again, I'm not the type of person, you know me, to be like, hey, everybody gets a medal. I'm not that either. Right. But this poor girl was like, I mean, I was stunned. I was stunned.
Me too. I had the same experience. Anyone with kids who's listening knows like there's so much junk kids programming. It's just so much junk. And so recently my wife and I were like, we need something with a little more substance, a little more educational, vocational, whatever. And we stumbled on this show and the kids love it. Don't get me wrong. But when I saw that end, I had the same reaction. I started wondering like, should I let them watch this? This is brutal.
It felt like Game of Thrones for kids and like cupcakes, you know, like it's just totally nuts. When I saw that little girl, like it was like the few seconds before she started to cry, she was like shaking.
Yeah.
You know, I was like, oh God.
Yeah. Poor kids. Besides the ending, it is pretty entertaining. And these kids are talented.
Oh yeah.
I'm guessing they're just learning from TikTok or something. I don't know.
Yeah, it's a YouTube video generation, right? Like every year every vintage is going to get smarter and smarter, and they can just, you know, especially for cooking, right? I mean, I don't know if you know this, but I used to work as a professional cook.
Where did you cook?
The main one was in San Francisco, but that was like a long, long time ago. But, you know, I threw out all my cookbooks because YouTube just crushes cookbooks. So if I had growing up YouTube, you know, I'd be cooking a lot earlier.
Back to the Twitter thing, like you've been doing VC for a while now.
11 years. Yeah.
11 years. I kind of consider you like a bit of a guru, like a luminary, you know, you've got all this wisdom. What percentage of your strategy is Twitter? Like in what ways do you use Twitter as part of your VC strategy? Well,
I have to break apart multiple premises of your question because they're not true. I don't have a VC strategy.
Okay. This is great.
And I don't use Twitter for any conscious reason.
But it's got to have value. I mean, when I was a founder, that's how I knew of you. That's what Semil, he's this amazing, thoughtful guy that I see from afar on Twitter. I would love to take money from him.
It does have value. One of my favorite shows of all time, which of course my wife hates, is Pawn Stars.
Oh yeah.
On History Channel. Terrible show. Don't watch it. But like, you know, one of Rick's famous lines is that like, you know, if something's collectible or valuable today, I typically when it started or was created, the intent behind it wasn't for it to be valuable or collectible. And so I kind of view Twitter that way because I started using it right when it came out. And I just thought, oh, it's like this interactive social network where you can put out content and interact with content and interact with links. And honestly, I had nothing going on in life. And got into some Twitter fights and just started there. So, so when people will look at my Twitter once before Elon changed the whole interface, which is bonkers, they'd be like, wow, you have a lot of tweets, and I'm like, yeah, I've been using it since 2008 or whatever, and so I just started using it as a way to like escape, basically.
Maybe this is a good way to transition into some AI stuff.
Oh, non sequitur. There we go.
Using your Twitter, your tweets, your posts. Sorry, for some inspiration.
My ex posts.
Yes, your ex posts. You and I have the good fortune of working and collaborating together on some things, and so we're both looking at AI rounds, Series A, seed.
Yeah.
And you put out this tweet recently. Competitive AI Series A rounds seem to start around 50 million in terms of round size. Bifurcation in Series A market of these rounds versus the traditional $10 million A round. What's going on here is the first question. And you, somebody who's been doing this for 11 years, you've seen these cycles, you've seen these moments of like extreme hype and mania. Where do things go from here?
I don't think anybody really knows. Like maybe like Nat Friedman and Daniel Gross and Sam Altman know, but like I don't think most people know.
Yeah.
And especially VCs don't know much, right? So
yeah,
put those two things together. I don't really know where we go from here. I'm not sure if this cycle and wave, meaning business cycle attached to the technology wave, will actually play out like other historical examples.
Okay.
So I don't want to be too cavalier about that, but I still think there's a world in which these things become insanely profitable, insanely valuable to other targets, insanely capital efficient. So I'm not saying that those things can't happen, but I think right now, because of the excitement, the uncertainty, the constant changing plate tectonic shifts that happen in that world, and also like if you have capital and you're chasing alpha, right? It is the only alpha game in town. One way to like create an analog for this is like, okay, you have Kevin Systrom and Mikey doing Instagram, let's say 14, 15 years ago, and they're looking at every iOS upgrade and what's happening in the sensors and the sensor fusion happening in the iPhone and creating all the little tricks that they did. I think a lot of people would probably believe that if Instagram stayed private, it'd probably be like $50 to $100 billion company today, right?
I've heard that. Yeah. I mean, I've heard people say that.
I mean, I feel like that's a fair speculation, right? If Slack's worth 25, Instagram at least worth 50.
Yeah. I mean, tough to say what they would have been without, the distribution and the support from Meta, et cetera, et cetera. But yeah.
But it was growing so fast. It was ripping. And so at the time when we all got the notification that Facebook was buying Instagram for like whatever the number was, 1.2 billion or something, I think people were shocked. But I think the small few that understood what it could have become were like, that's way too small. Yeah. And it's possible that same thing is happening today, right?
Right.
Like it's way too small. We just don't know yet. And it's also lining up with a number of other things that you and I talk about offline a lot, which is, if this game wasn't happening now with so many big VC funds, where would the money be going? Right.
Yep.
And so it's creating a nice sort of symbiotic relationship between capital, exploration, and hopefully value creation.
Yeah. Talk about that. Unpack the symbiotic relationship.
Well, I mean, you would know better than me, right? Like, I feel like I should be asking you in the sense of like, when these companies right now, instead of just paying for the talent is more expensive. So you're maybe your top flight engineer for a non-AI company 4 years ago may have been X. Now it's 2X.
Yep.
Maybe it's 3X. I don't even know. Then it's like you have all the software and cloud related costs that go into the company of what they're building, in addition to whatever real estate and human capital cost. And then you have like the infrastructure chips part, which is, very expensive and sort of rate limited right now. And you have the FOMO from capital of not, they cannot afford to miss parts of this wave. So it creates this perfect storm of activity.
Yeah.
That, when you break it apart, it logically makes sense.
Speaking of the Kevin Systrom, Mike Krieger Instagram example, are we starting to see potential examples of those for AI happening now? First of all, acquisitions taking place, period. Second of all, acquisitions taking place that we may look back on and be like, oh, those were cheap.
Yeah. No, this is a good topic to explore, Mike. I think this is where past history can inform the current day and future, but there are major caveats that complicate this sort of analysis. So I would say that it's a sort of canonical activity for public market companies when their stocks are riding really high in terms of multiples and PE ratios to use their stock to be acquisitive.
Yep.
So Mark Benioff, I think, is probably ace number one in terms of this strategy, right? If you look at his acquisitions over the last 5 years when his stock was exploding, I mean, he really bought some really nice assets. I think that you're starting to see that happen a little bit in small cap, meaning like sub $500 million acquisitions in AI. And I think a lot of those are probably more talent based than they are necessarily just revenue based. Some of them are product based. I think the issue is that how much this area is ripping and the sort of deterrent strategy of the FTC and DOJ under the current administration. I think it's just a bona fide fact that a lot of companies are very skittish to raise any flags to those groups. And, we're not really sure a year from now whether that regime will be the same regime either.
Yeah, so they almost have to maybe thread the needle a little bit. Do you want to jump in now while your stock is riding high, or do you want to wait to see how the administration plays out and how the climate changes?
The other game theory here would be like the DOJ and the FTC are doing so many broad-based investigations that maybe their plate is full and you can do one now.
Right. Or you could at least do like a smallish, like you said, like a 500-ish. Maybe somewhat related to this topic, another one of your tweets was talking about incumbent advantages right now with AI, around how incumbents should not be underestimated. They've got the distribution advantage, they've got the packaging advantage, engineering power. I see a line between that tweet and what you were talking about a little while ago about how some of these acquisitions maybe are a little more talent based, not necessarily strategic acquisitions. I wonder, do you feel like that will continue to be the case because incumbents have this advantage? Or do you think there will be strategic sort of breakouts on the horizon?
No, I think it'll ebb and flow over time. So that tweet was from like a year ago. And I still think that's true today.
Yeah, incumbents are moving, right? Like they're doing stuff.
Yeah. And I think a lot of us understand the distribution advantage. They have talent, right? Like the random 30-year-old at an incumbent tech company 10, 15 years ago is not the same as that random 10-year-old, 30-year-old today. So just generationally, they're more adept now and sort of trending younger. I think it's a little bit complicated in the sense that I always, even though I believe what I said in that tweet, which is the incumbents have the initial advantage and a lion's share of the market cap returns that are going to be generated from this technology will be captured back to those original shareholders in those companies. That doesn't mean that there aren't opportunities for startups.
Yeah.
So both of those things I think could be true. I think the opportunity set could be more narrow, and you'll always have that sort of David and Goliath, like somebody
always,
you picked, smartly Pika as a category to invest in with those folks. And, that's proving out every month to be a more interesting category. What's going to happen? Who knows? And so I think that there's going to be a number of new like AI first companies that have a way of attacking a problem or market that the incumbent just would never have had the time and attention to do, or the patience for discovery to unearth. I think you'll have like optimizations happening that can create massive gross margins in business lines where a lot of these incumbents may have, 10 extra people for every one that they need in a certain part of their org. So there's probably a lot of fat to cut, and so we'll probably go on this like fat cutting journey for a decade. And the entrepreneurs who are part of cutting the fat or the VCs and in funding those things will reap the rewards of that.
Correct me if I'm wrong on this, but you strike me as a person that's, based on our conversations and podcast interviews I've heard you give, you seem to be a bit of a student of history when it comes to investing. You've learned from really smart people. No? Am I wrong about that?
I think I use history as like a crutch to help me build a view for today.
Okay.
It's just a step in the analysis. But it doesn't mean that it always copies itself or rhymes. Like, that
right.
classic line, right? Like history doesn't repeat, it rhymes. Yeah. Although I think there may be less rhyming in AI.
So my question is, if we're doing this podcast 10 years from now, we were to look back on right now, 2024, who do you think is doing interesting stuff in terms of AI investing? Like who's doing the really unique stuff that we'll think was really smart? And what are they doing?
On the investor side?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think any of this will be earth shattering, but I think Nat Friedman and Daniel Gross, I mean, by far and away, maybe one other person who I'll mention, really were sitting ahead of this curve. I remember meeting, I don't know if Daniel would remember, but I remember meeting Daniel, I think when he moved here, and he was already known to be way ahead of the curve. Had his company that was focused on AI, was acquired by Apple, did all that stuff. And I think he's had a standing offer from Sequoia before he even became of age to drink alcohol. So I would cite those two as being at the white hot core center of this universe and I think smartly broadening out and making a lot of interesting bets and grants and strategies. What I think is interesting too is they didn't try to announce a firm name or a strategy or a website. It was like, it's the Nat and Dan Fund. It's like a podcast.
Yeah, it's like that's a good analogy.
Yeah, so I think there was something really organic, maybe intentional or not. You should have them on here. I could be your sidekick for that one.
Oh yeah, we could do that. Yeah, we could have you sit in. That'd be awesome.
Yeah, and then Elad, of course. I mean, I remember we had a private event where he spoke a number of years ago, and he was just saying, people were asking him like, how did you find whatever foundation model that he was an early investor in? And he was like, well, I read the Transformer papers a while ago and I thought they were interesting. And I started to track all the authors of the Transformer papers. This is like before 2019, 2018.
Wow.
And I was like, damn, yeah. Every investor who was in that room afterwards was like, this guy. So I think Elad, Gil, Nat and Dan, and then there are other people too, but like, they're just in their own orbit.
You mentioned grants. I'm assuming you're referring to AI grant.
Yeah.
Have you guys at Haystack ever thought about doing anything like that? Like a accelerator, incubator, YC-ish type thing? Has that ever been on your radar?
This part could turn into a clip for you, a reel.
Let's mark the timestamp.
I believe that there are so many venture funds and ventures gotten so big and so competitive that people are looking for all sorts of edges to use their capital to do something different.
Yep.
I think 99% of that activity is in the pursuit of trying to do something different and literally throwing stuff at the wall. We don't do any of that stuff.
Sometimes it works though, right? Well, but maybe when it works, it's not spaghetti, right?
We're smaller, so I think we take a more people-based approach. Is like,
yeah,
what we invest in is a function of what our network brings us and the people we can actually meet. Now, I think for Nat and Dan, I don't want to speak about their strategy too much because I don't know. But from afar, it seems like they were able to use capital as a weapon in a focused way to just help people start. It's the same thing at YC where you just sort of say, hey, here's a little bit to start, and it's the cost of doing business.
Yep.
And so that really makes sense to me, right? Those kind of things really make sense to me. In fact, I think a lot of venture firms, just speaking generally, don't use their capital as a weapon. The best firms do.
Capital as a weapon. Explain what you mean by that exactly, just for listeners who don't understand.
What makes venture unique is it's an asset class where your brand matters. And there are a small number of winners that end up paying for all the ones that don't work. So it's completely asymmetric. If you're lucky enough to have an outcome, completely asymmetric, power law driven outcomes. It's a crazy world. So when you're starting to invest, there's absolutely no way to know. So I think of like people, who like Nat has been angel investing and, sort of been around as a startup founder and, successful executive. Daniel has certainly been around YC and started Pioneer Fund. I think that they understand that if you get to people early and you think they're talented and they just need some starter capital, and especially in a field like AI, that giving them money, which if you have billions of dollars is actually not that much money, and like becoming friends with them and like just being someone that they remember early is a way to use capital as a weapon so that later on you get phone calls that matter.
Yeah.
I think picking something off right at the same time, like, when Matt Kohler started 15 years ago and kind of changed how a lot of VC firms were approaching hiring and targeting, he was known as a sharpshooter, right? He found Instagram at the Series A and Bill found Uber at the Series A. They were looking at data, right? But they had an intuitive sense of where it's going. I think what Nat and Dan were saying is like, we don't know if it's going to be transformers or solid state models, like whatever the next thing is. And so let's fund talented people. It's not going to break our bank account, but then we're going to be friends. They're going to be in our orbit. They're going to send us their friends. They're going to call us when they need strategic advice. It's the same playbook at YC. How I would tie this into a bow is that like actually seeding the ecosystem with small amounts of dollars, it creates noise. You have to manage it. You actually have to help them. But that's a way of using capital as a weapon on the early side.
Yeah. Now,
the other end of it, you have, let's say, a fund like Founders Fund or pick your big fund. When they put $100-200 million in a company early, that's their use of capital as a weapon and saying, we're going to make this bet. Like, I'm sure you were at Upfront and Brian Sigerman just said, our AI investment strategy is just give it all to OpenAI, and they made that investment and call it a day. They're using capital as a weapon.
That's really helpful and insightful. You mentioned you guys rely a lot on your network. I think I just heard you say
entirely.
One of the things I've heard you talk a lot about is the decision-making process, investment decisions. I've heard you talk about how, in a lot of ways, that's what LPs are buying in a sense, right? They're buying
Absolutely.
sort of the decision-making process. How does Haystack make decisions, and has that changed in any way due to AI? Have you had to change the way you make decisions in this market, in this climate, how fast things are moving, how big things are getting, et cetera?
My philosophy here is that that the product, like when you built Anchor, the product was the ability to consume and create a podcast.
Yep.
The product of a VC firm is an investment decision.
Yeah.
That's it. I believe that to be true. I would probably argue to the death with anyone who disagreed with that. So let's just assume that's true. Then all the inputs to what you make a decision around is the art and the craft. And so I do think those are reflective of your brand, the network you have access to, frankly, the creators who want to invite you along to their journey, right? That's what it is. Like, you're not building Pika, right? You're not building Tome. You've been selected by those founders to be a part of whatever journey they're going on. That's the game. So when I think about the investment decision, it's like, okay, we take money from a university, a hospital system, a charitable foundation. They're entrusting us that we're going to be good citizens. We're going to meet all sorts of people. We're going to keep tabs on the ones we like. And that when the Tomes and Pikas call us, we're going to take the call. And that when we're making the decision, we're actually not running around with an accelerator or an event or all this other bullshit. We're actually have a clear mind about making that, what does it Jeff Bezos call like a one-way door decision?
Yeah.
All these decisions are irreversible, just one-way decisions. So I believe that very deeply. Now, what has changed over time? I'll give a two-part answer. So in terms of AI, what has changed is because in some of the dynamics we talk about where the round sizes are bigger than typically we play in, we always want to break rules and have exceptions to those rules. So some of the rounds that we've participated in are just straight to Series A or larger, but we give ourselves a few shots on goal in every fund that sort of break the pattern.
Mm-hmm.
And so we've done that for AI. In the past, we did that for defense and hardware. And, now those things are interesting. Like people ask me today, like, how are you guys in Sail Drone? And I'm like, oh, I just met the guy in 2016, like no one wanted to do that deal. Right. And so I think of it as like we made an exception and it sort of worked out. And so you get some exceptions in these funds. Now, the main adjustment, when I started, I was just a guy with a fund going on a random walk, and I would get very founder focused and like got conviction in the person and then just would ride that person all the way through whatever journey they're going to. I think as we've grown, modestly and everything has gotten more competitive, I will say the hardest thing for me now is to be attracted to an individual person or protagonist, founder, but then not really like the direction or space that they're going into.
You're saying that happens more?
Oh, it happens all the time. And I just say, like, I really like this person and they're great. Like I just met this kid who just graduated from Stanford. He's doing this thing, perfect founder market fit based on a personal experience. And I just really hate the market. I think that part of it's maturing. Part of it is having slightly bigger funds. Part of it is learning from the scar tissue of prior mistakes.
But you would have done that. You would have done that deal 5-6 years ago.
Maybe like 8 or 9 years ago. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Back to the LPs thing. The size of these rounds.
Of the AI rounds.
Yeah. The amount of capital. Is this good for venture?
Well, good for who in venture?
Well, that's part of the question.
Well, let's go through. Is it good for LPs?
Yeah.
Yes. So my view on LPs is LPs will always bitch about the market.
Okay.
Always. That's fine. By the way, they fuel and fund everything that everybody does, right?
Right.
So they're allowed to complain. There's nothing they should be complaining about, though, because they'll be the beneficiaries of these waves. These endowments, foundations, charitable groups, they have their money in venture for seeking this alpha and finding people like us to help them catch these waves and participate in these waves. And no one's making them re-sign up for funds. No one's making them sign up for bigger funds.
Yep.
So they have the ultimate discretion. So I think of it as like, if I were an LP, I would be really excited
to be a part of this wave
about having a small part of my cash going into this place that I can't go manage.
Right.
And like, yeah, there's going to be 30 entrepreneurs in every fund of 40 companies that just literally fall on their face. It's okay.
Right. What about the venture funds?
Well, the venture funds there, the issue is the sort of principal agent problem between the fee base that you get contractually versus the long-term stewardship and trying to generate the returns, which I think is a big unknown because, before the stock market correction, which I think started right before, like sort of the appetizer of the Ukraine war was like the beginning of this stock market correction. And then, things went into this sort of massive correction. I think before that, everything was up and to the right and people just thought, nothing could stop it. I think the same thing is true is that people once the Ukraine war started to take root and it became what it was, and other conflicts broke out and things got tighter and inflation, yada, 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 whatever you want to talk about, people started to then swing on the other side. Like, it's just going to be this way now forever.
Right.
And I also think nobody really knows. Nobody really knows. And so, you make the Pika bet. When was that? Last summer, right?
Yeah, it was late 2023.
Yeah. So most people say, like, if you enter at seed or A, and it does become a good outcome, you'll only start to be able to like taste parts of the outcome around year 7, 8, 9, or 10.
Right.
So if we're talking 2023 and 2030, we've gone through 2 presidential elections, like
different world.
Yeah, like Texas may be on fire. Like, who knows?
Yeah.
I just think that a lot of these things are really, really hard to know. And maybe this is part where like venture folks in the culture get caught up, where you want to be seen as a thought leader and like prognosticate and make thesis-driven, conviction-level bets. But we don't know even what's going to happen next week. I mean, think about this. A week from today, 51 weeks ago, there was the SVB thing.
Yeah.
No one saw
Crazy.
that.
What about the startups? So we did LPs, we did funds. What about the startups?
I mean, it's their world. It's an amazing opportunity. All these venture funds want to give them money. Literally, there's nothing stopping good, talented entrepreneurs from doing their thing other than not being maniacal about finding product market fit. That's their only job. And so, I mean, it's their world. I mean, it's an amazing spot for them.
There are traps, though, right?
There's traps in any business. No one.
Yeah.
All of this stuff is not forced.
Right.
Like,
right. That's your point about the LPs. Yeah.
If an entrepreneur gets trapped, it's by their own doing.
Right.
If the LP gets trapped in a bad fund, it's their choice. If a VC gets trapped in a crappy set of investments, they made the decision.
Right.
I don't know. That's my philosophy. I just don't think. I think this is a little bit of like there shouldn't be really crying in baseball.
You keep talking about how no one knows what's going to play out, and you don't have a strategy. So maybe you can't answer this question, but there's a lot of talk about OpenAI, or is it going to be open source? Is there going to be this long tail of breakouts at the application layer, or is it going to be a monopoly on the other side? Like, what's your best guess how this all plays out?
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I mean, again, I feel like I'm talking out of both sides of my mouth now by saying like no one knows anything. But I'll repeat maybe what I say to a lot of founders I meet when we get into this conversation. They'll say, Semil, what do you think? And I'll say, hey, I don't know, but like, here's kind of what my intuition is telling me. Typically in venture, people will think in a competitive market, it will be a winner take all, where like the second place company, you get steak knives or something, and the first prize is like, victory. I tend to think in this world, you'll have a world of thousands of models, and a few of them will be really big, and a few of them will be really specific, and some of them will be small, and some of them will be specific to specific languages, like human languages. Some of them may be specific to geographies. Some of them may be specific to industries. And so I think of it as like the way I've been trying to visualize this. If you see somebody playing the piano and you're like, wow, it's just a beautiful song. And then you open up the hood and you see all the strings move, like everything moving. I think of that as like LLMs just talking to each other. And so I think that the world will look like the inside of a piano. The infrastructure will look like the inside of a piano. I think that things will move in this sort of open and closed world, will absolutely move to open source. Now, I'm a bit of an open source homer. We've done a lot of open source investing. But I think of open source investing, why is it interesting, is because you can, for small dollars, you can start to seed networks. You can start to understand what developers want. And you can start to give that end user opportunities for control. I do see that being a very strong opposing force to today. But I think we could have a world in which, if we have 1,000 models, we could also have a world of like closed source and applications, and also more open source, broader kind of escape hatch type activity where you could have closed source and open source working together as well. So maybe the piano applies there. Then I think another one is just like lowering the cost of goods sold. So like if you're building a car and you're thinking about the COGS, what are the COGS of all these companies right now? Is a lot of cloud infra and like chips cost. I think if you look at history, that's where history maybe is an example where you could glean from. Is like there's no way those costs will stay that high.
Yeah.
So you have to imagine a world where that gets more and more abstracted away. That could be abstracted away through just cost or where everything is processed.
Yep.
Instead of a central processing or cloud processing, if it's done more on the edge or near the device or in a more controlled perimeter. So I tend to think of the fault lines of the world that way.
Yep.
And so makes it very hard to have a strong thesis today. Although, like, if I were to spit that back at myself and say, like, I should probably be investing in more open source stuff, right?
Totally. I want to cover one last topic that by the time this airs, maybe somewhat outdated, but when you hear the question, I think you'll see why I think maybe it won't be. You've recently tweeted a bit about the Reddit IPO. Mm-hmm. And when I think about some of the things you've said and some of the things I've read about it, it feels like it may represent a little bit of like a turning point in the market, right? It's the first social IPO in how many years? A big part of their business is now selling training data, right? Where a big part of their business previously was only ad revenue, right? So when I look at this, it almost looks like it could be a sign of things to come, maybe. Is that how you see it? Or what are some of the other interesting dynamics about this IPO?
Unfortunately, I don't see it that
okay,
way.
I'm glad I asked then.
Yeah. Well, one, Reddit's been around for a long time.
Yeah.
I don't think there are many real comps to Reddit.
Okay, say more.
It is truly unique. I mean, what would you put in its category?
Maybe Twitter.
Maybe.
Yeah.
I think that's a stretch. That's what I was thinking too.
Yeah.
So I think it's been around for a while. It's very unique. It is in the white hot core of the sort of meme movement and Wall Street bets and all of that. And the people on that site today, now we'll get back to this, can change the culture, not just of the internet, of how we operate. I fundamentally believe that.
Yep, I do too.
When you put all of that in together, plus like this ability to be a trading data source and examine all these new business lines, I think we'll see that stock be very volatile and asymmetric to the upside, completely break fundamentals. But there's one huge catch. Are there enough people, interesting people in the world that want to continue creating content on Reddit? And just constantly replenishing that supply of people, replenishing their network. I don't know how you do that.
But it's been doing that, right?
It has been doing that. It has.
Yeah.
And it's just a TBD as to, does that continue? Now, I personally would make the bet that Reddit as a web-based, free, open product that you can pseudonymously interact on the internet with some form of decorum and sort of rules is probably the only place to do that. Maybe Twitter.
Yeah.
So I would take that side of the bet, but that's the one risk, I think.
What about this training data thing? Like, does this change the fabric of the internet? Is this what we're going to see out of every company now? Ads going to the wayside and training data being the business model?
Oh yeah. So I just read like Tom Tungu's post on this.
Oh yeah. I think I saw that too. Yeah.
Yeah. I think ads will be there. I think this is just a new business line, but I think the reality is how many properties will have such unique training data that this becomes a viable option.
Anything with UGC.
I think anything with UGC, but like we could probably restrict it to 10 names max.
Yeah.
You know? So like, I think the key part is not UCG, it's UUGC. Unique user generated content.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I would say like Stack Overflow, but in a limited way. Quora, definitely.
Yep.
So Quora right now, completely undervalued.
Are people still... do people still answer questions on there? I haven't used it in a while.
It's one of the top traffic sites on the internet, period.
Wow. Etsy, maybe?
Yeah, but that the only UCG part of like Etsy, Yelp, etc., are like the reviews.
Yeah.
Which again I think is a problem. And actually we're looking at an investment around content moderation and AI right now, which is bizarre that you brought that up.
Universe sending you breadcrumbs.
The universe is sending me breadcrumbs, yeah. But you know, again, I think the meta point, I mean, Twitter, right? Like,
yep.
I just don't think there's many. So I don't think it's going to be a shift. And I still think ads work in the model. So yeah.
Yeah. Semil, this has been fun.
I hope I haven't bored you.
No, I know we planned to have a meandering, let's see where it goes conversation. I feel like we accomplished that. You know, I know you well, but each time we talk, I feel like I learn a little bit more. And yeah, looking forward to watching the Kids Baking Championship with my kids tomorrow, Saturday morning. All right, last question. What's the last thing you asked ChatGPT or Perplexity? Last thing you're comfortable sharing, at least.
Yeah. I don't use it as much, honestly, which, I mean, it sounds a little bit, I like them, but I have a Perplexity window open somewhere. Hold on. Oh, yeah. Best taquerias in the San Francisco Mission District.
Did it deliver? Did it give you the answer you were looking for?
Well, I know all them.
No.
But my favorite one, it put as number one.
Oh, wow. There you go.
The one I go to the most is that one.
What was it?
It's called La Taqueria on Mission and 25th.
Cool. Semil, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to Generative Now. If you liked what you heard, please do us a favor and rate and review the episode. It really does help. And if you want to learn more, follow Lightspeed at LightspeedVP on YouTube, X, LinkedIn, Instagram, or anywhere else. Generative Now is produced by Lightspeed in partnership with Pod People. I am Michael Mignano, and we will be back next week. Thanks.